reNEW, Bible principles and practical steps towards church revitalisation. reNEW, Session 1, Get Real. I'm thinking of Derek. He's a plain-speaking Christian farmer. Round here, farming has gone from horse and plough to combine harvesters that cost £500,000 in just 3 generations. If you haven't been able to change, if you haven't been adaptable and realistic, you haven't survived. Many times in Christian discussions, I've seen Derek roll his eyes and say, "Get real." If we don't get real, there is no hope of putting things right. If you have serious chest pains, but only take a tablet for indigestion, it's unlikely to turn out well. Do you agree that Christians are often unrealistic? And if yes, have you ever thought why? Here are a few reasons that I've run into. I reckon that these patterns of thought are almost subliminal. And because people think in these ways almost subconsciously, it's important for us to think about them consciously and then unthink them if they're wrong. Here is the first. Some Christians think that it is their duty to be upbeat and positive about everything. Over the last 30 years, I've been a pastor in Baptist, Brethren, Independent Evangelical and Pentecostal churches. I love them all. But in Pentecostal churches in particular, if someone spoke up with a bit of hard reality, well, brother, that probably is a great idea, but remember we still have £50,000 worth of debt from your last great idea. If somebody spoke up with a bit of reality, it was sometimes perceived by others as showing a lack of faith. The Bible principle underpinning this session is Paul's instruction in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 15 to speak the truth in love. There can be no lack of faith in truth. If you say this is how it is and things are never going to be any different, then you probably are showing a lack of faith. But speaking the truth in love, not the truth with bitterness or cynicism or despair or blame, but speaking the truth with love, there's never anything wrong with that. In fact, Paul says, speaking the truth in love will bring you to growth and maturity. Another reason I think that some Christians are unrealistic is because they don't know the true situation. And if you mention a census or survey or data or analysis, they back off, "Whoa, we have God and his word. We don't need your trendy business jargon round here, thank you." And lurking at the back of their mind is the memory of a Bible story where God gets angry with David because he organises a census. Well, they're right. That story is in there. Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census. There you go. Censuses are of the devil. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. Ask your leaders about this story. They'll love explaining this one. But in a few words, David's motives here are wrong. There are, on the other hand, multiple examples of God instructing that a census is taken and that information is gathered. After all, there's a whole book of the Bible that is called Numbers. I love the story of the third miraculous catch of fish, the one after the resurrection. It's in John chapter 21. The net was full of large fish, 153. Wouldn't you have rounded it down to 150? Don't we all know people who would have rounded it up? Oh, there was about 200. But no, there was 153. The fish were counted, and that's how many there were. Numbers don't tell the whole story. We don't put our trust in numbers or spreadsheets or business management models. Our trust is in the Lord. But good information is a useful tool. The third reason that I've run into why Christians are sometimes unrealistic is that they think that with God on their side, they cannot fail. After all, Jesus has promised, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. How can you go wrong with that kind of backup? That promise is wonderfully true of the Church Universal. But it is wrong to dangle that promise around the neck of an individual church like a magic charm. 6 churches close every week in the UK. They probably all thought that it couldn't happen to them. The Jews didn't think the exile could happen to them. They thought the fact that they were God's chosen people and that God had given them this land meant that they couldn't be overrun. But they were. It wasn't the end of the story. God had a bigger plan. But it happened. And the Jews were dumbfounded because they were sheltering behind the imaginary protection of a misunderstood promise. You'll have a chance in your groups to come up with other reasons why Christians might be unrealistic. But those are some of the main ones that I've run into. So, to get real, we need to know how things really are. Some accurate information is going to be useful. Numbers do not give the whole story, but some up-to-date data is going to be very helpful. How do we measure? And what do we measure? And what might be useful indicators of church health? And what else should we bear in mind? Well, one thing to bear in mind is the benefits of measuring. Apart from the information you will get, there can be other potential benefits. For a start, you can involve everybody. This promotes a sense of unity, shared purpose, community, and fellowship. Be very careful that you don't give the impression that the leadership is auditing the church. A church version of Ofsted? I'll pass on that one, thank you. No, this is something we are going to do together. We're looking at ourselves to celebrate the good and see if there are ways that things can be better. Also, use the opportunity to emphasize prayer. Right, everybody, as we go through this reNEW material, we want everyone to pray and pray that God will show us what we need to know and that God will lead us where He wants us to go. Another consideration. Say loud and upfront that all measuring is inexact. Only God knows how we measure up in every area. And He does know. Jesus walks among the candlesticks, Revelation chapter 2 and 3, and constantly assesses His light-bearing churches. But our measuring is approximate. Remembering this can save you a lot of argument. Well, somebody will say, I don't agree with that part of the survey. Just say, yeah, you're probably right. We're going for the big picture here. It's an impressionist canvas, not photorealism. And remembering that our measuring is an approximation also spares us from spending too long on the process. I have known churches that have spent so long on the church check that I'm worried that they're going to close down before it's finished. It's not an end in itself. It's just a tool, not for polishing up and displaying, but for using. One last consideration here. It's very hard to look at yourself in an unbiased way. That is why one of the future sessions is Mystery Shopper. How do others see us? For example, almost every church assesses itself as welcoming and friendly. But it's almost bound to. All the people who came to your church and didn't get a good welcome and didn't find it friendly have cleared off somewhere else. All the people who made friends and stayed naturally think it's friendly. I don't know why you can't tickle yourself. It's a bit of a shame, really. But you can't. It just doesn't work. And there are some questions that you can't ask yourself and get the right response. So what you measure and how you measure it, there will be lots of suggestions in the notes. There is a sample survey, there is an outline church check, but there is real value in you discussing together what might be useful indicators of church health. You decide. It's up to you. So set a time scale, Involve as many people as possible. Encourage everyone to pray. Do some measuring. Get some information. Gather it up. And then have a get-together where you share what you've discovered with the whole church. That's session 1. Getting real. reNEW. Bible principles and practical steps towards church revitalisation.